and that deep. They were 2 and 2. 2 there and 2 there. The 4. Fortunately, one of them was open, a lower one. And so I clambered up on a rock table that Francis had built, had made, shaped the stone alongside the window. I clambered up, and then, fortunately being thin, I was able to climb through the window, fall over the sink onto the floor, and then come round and open the front door for Baba. And then I led him into the main room, a short passageway into the main room, his room, the room where his bed is, where we had the meetings. And Baba seated himself. For a moment I gestured towards his bed. Baba sat for a moment and then got up and went to the room, to a seat, a cane chair, which we still have. Cane chair with arms, a settee type cane chair. A certain depth, and has a certain depth and comfortability. And Baba seated himself in that. And I went to my desk, still agitated and feeling most awkward over not having the key to the house. To explain, to go back, which I may have covered.
Doesn't matter.
I was, of course, helping Francis. I arranged a transfer in the army. I arranged a transfer from Sydney to Brisbane barracks in order to continue my work as a psychologist for the army in Brisbane. And that meant that, one, I could travel every weekend, Friday afternoon into Monday morning, to be here to help Francis. I also took leave without pay and my annual leave at the same time in order to help as much as possible. Naturally, I did not have the key, but I didn't think of it at that time. I was awkward, being conscious of the fact that I was the householder and didn't have a key.
It was not a laughing matter.
It was not a laughing matter. And I fussed around over the desk looking for a key, presumably, and then for some reason I said to Baba, perhaps the key has fallen down through a trapdoor that Francis and I had cut in the floor that gave access to a large area under the floorboards, constituting, in those days, to our mind, an air raid shelter. Of course, it had to the side access in the side for ventilation, which meant, of course, that unwanted creatures like snakes could easily get in. And when I said to Baba, perhaps the key has fallen down in this trapdoor, at the same time I was also thinking, what am I saying? Who knows what's down there and what snakes could be down there, because I was well aware that there were snakes in the area.
And you were afraid of them?
And I was petrified, not just afraid. I was petrified at that time of snakes for some reason. And Barbara gestured as yes. So I thought, okay, I just have to do it because it was his directive. So I turned to the desk to find something that would enable me to lever up the floor boards, and Barbara clapped. And I looked at Barbara and he gestured no. It was only subsequently when I then visited Avatar's abode and helped in the development of the rundown pineapple farm, the clearing of the bush, etc., that I realised that I'd lost my fear of snakes. Quite amazing. The simple act of obedience cleared, although I don't like them, although I don't wish to associate with them, I had lost my fear, and I had to did deal with snakes many times here on Avatar's abode. Okay, Jay Barbara. What?
Oh, no, I was just thinking of, isn't that the same time that you had the hat on the table?
Oh yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes. Yes, I'll describe the day.
At your last
Yeah.
thing today.
Yes, well, one thing, what was so wonderful was that Barbara, with the four men Mandalay and us four Australian Barbara lovers, we then spent a wonderful day with him in this big room, this special room of his, so strongly permeated with his presence. Wonderful room, and that we were then for the whole day with him, and then travelled in the evening again in taxis back to the airport, again early in the evening. But I will describe the day in more detail next time we talk.
Okay.
Jay Barbara. Jay Barbara.
Jay Baba.
Yeah, well, of course, after the episode with the key and the fear of snakes, etc., the others came in, and so the day began, a wonderful day, such a wonderful time with Barbara, when Barbara was so different. He was relaxed. You could say he was at home, and actually that reminds me of what I wrote, remembering those days in my book. Perhaps I could read it to you.
Good idea.
Erich, Francis and the others then came in, and over the next 9 or 10 to 10 hours I spent one of my most heartwarming periods with Barbara. It is rich in memories. Above all, Barbara expressed how he felt at home in the house. And he acted and looked at home, relaxed and comfortable. A radiator was put on near him. I remember it just being placed near the chair that he was still sitting in, that same chair that I described earlier.
What kind of radiator? One of the...
Just an open one bar. A small, in those days it was a simple one bar radiator. a pink eiderdown, which means a warm bed cover, placed over Barbara's lap, and we all sat or stood informally at ease around him. There were, as I recall, no lengthy discourses or conversations, but what I think of as easy, spiritual heart talk, centred on Barbara, but with everyone in some way or another participating. Barbara decided that a cable should be sent to Mayra, telling her that he was well and that they were now returning to India. Barbara talked about Mayer House, how happy he was in, quote, the house that Francis and Bill built. He said again to me, never sell it. He looked at the photos we had on the walls and, pointing at one showing him in his Cumberley coat, remarked that it reminded him of the early days. Then he digressed and spoke of Pendu, injured as he had been in the car accident, and how Pendu was growing old, and reminiscing about the old days. Then Barbara himself talked of how the Mundley needed bicycles in the early days to keep up with him when he walked. Also, he spoke of his period of seclusion on Angaris Rishi Hill and of the conditions there for himself and the Mundley. He gestured questioningly at my army cap on the desk. And that gave me the opportunity of saying that I was a psychologist in the army and that I felt very concerned over such work and my involvement with and effect on other people in fulfilling it. Barbara looked at me and said, "Take my name before every interview." At one stage, I was sent out to purchase lemonade for Barbara. It was cold, and Barbara did not like cold fluid. So the bottle and a glass of the lemonade were put before the radiator to become warm. And I remember thinking at the time how the glass, of course, with the lemonade would have lost all its sparkle by the time it was warm enough and drunk by Barbara. Just that little thought of how Barbara accepted whatever in such a natural way. He didn't like cold drinks. In fact, I remember him also saying, and I can't remember when, but saying that one shouldn't drink cold water on hot days or when one has been out in the sun or working so that one is warm in oneself. One should be careful. One should not have then cold water. At another stage, Robert was sent to dispatch the cable to Mayra and to purchase fish, bread and cheese for lunch. On his return with the food, we all gathered in the kitchen of the house. This was a room 9 by 9 feet and facing north. The sun at the time was coming through the windows and warming it. It was such a beautiful time, and Barbara was seated on a wooden, simple kitchen chair, one of our kitchen chairs, in the passageway, just the kitchen. Then from the kitchen there was a passageway leading to the bathroom and a further bedroom at the end. And Barbara sat in that, but alongside the table, which was placed against the wall, small table.
The wall that was against the living room, or the wall against
against the bathroom.
Right, yeah.
Yeah. In other words, yes. In other words, the windows to the north, the table to the right, and Barbara seated in the passageway alongside that table, and then in the corner near the windows was a further little stand on which were the kerosene pressure stoves that we used for cooking. And that was where I started to cook the fish.
So as you're looking out the window, is that to your right?
In other words, looking out the window, it's to the right. And then on the left was the door into the passageway that led to the front door. The entrance door to the house.
Yeah, I remember that.
And yes. And watched as I and later Francis, in other words, gave me advice on cooking, putting little flour on each side of the fish, each piece of fish, and then cooking it on the 2 kerosene stoves. As each piece of fish was finished, it was placed on a plate and handed to Barbara, who then put it on bread and a thick slice of cheese, which he had cut with his own hand from a large block of, it was actually a quarter of a big round block of cheese. And it was wonderful how Barbara did it. No finesse, just bang, just cut off a hunk. It was quite delightful. Plate after plate was gradually handed by Barbara to each of the Mundley and Australian lovers, standing and sitting in the kitchen. Naturally, as cook, I was last, and conscious that everyone else was either finished or nearly so, I sat on the floor and hurriedly began to eat. This I had difficulty doing because of lower teeth trouble. I had 3 or 4 teeth out in the lower jaw. And of course I had difficulty trying to eat hurriedly, as I was the last. And Barbara suddenly looked at me with concern and gestured what was wrong. And I said, Barbara, I had the teeth missing. And he said to get false teeth. And of course when I did, and I was so proud of them, and would happily tell people how I had false teeth as directed by God. That scene with the sun and warmth, Barbara so lovingly cutting great slices of cheese and feeding us, his attentiveness and concern for us, the informal companionship and informality of all 9 of us in our small room. All this is another incident where words fail utterly to convey the beauty and wonder of God-man's presence on earth amongst us. It was indeed a most beautiful example, so natural, just so lovingly informal. Barbara just sitting amongst us. Yeah. Later in the afternoon, the subject of our return to the airport was discussed, and I said that the car used for him in 1956 was still serviceable and available. Barbara must have sensed my inner reservations. I had no idea. I'd been away. I hadn't driven it for at least 3.5 or 4 months, because I was up, as I've said, at Avatar's abode, helping to prepare for Barbara's visit. And I had no idea what the state of the car, but I wanted to drive him again. So I sort of I inwardly prayed, I hope it'll be all right, Barbara. Please make it all right. But as I said, he obviously, Barbara, that he intended in the first place. Who knows what the motive of God-man's move and actions and words. But Barbara decided that we should go down and inspect the car. And what was so amazing to me was it was not a smooth path. It wasn't an easy slope down from Mayor House where we were, the house that we were in, down to the double garage where the car was. It's down a slope. It's at a lower level, and the path was rough. Cut stone, chipped stone, and then steps. And to think that Barbara did that after the second car accident with the injury to his leg and the pain that it must cause him to move as he did, to walk as he did. And yet he came down. Now how far from out of the house, down alongside the house, down the path? We're talking 40, 50 feet?
I filmed it when we were in Sydney. So
right. Yeah, good. Yeah, good. Yeah. Anyway, what was so wonderful was we got down there and we all stood and looked at the car. And Barbara again asked me if I was sure it would get him to the airport. And again, with my fingers mentally crossed, I said it would. We paused in the doorway of the garage. It was just before actually going into the doorway. I can remember the spot so clearly. And for some reason, I said to Barbara that I was thinking of converting the double garage into a house for my parents, for my father who was about to retire from work. And Barbara very emphatically, I remember the gesture like that, a very emphatic, yes, do so. It was so definite.
Bill, is that the door that goes into the bathroom now at Jane's house?
See, there's no outside door there now. There was in the bathroom.
There is an outside door, sort of. Remember where the laundry bathroom is? There's an outside door there.
Well, that's it.
Okay. I think they probably did that on purpose.
Sorry, I'd forgotten. Isn't that ridiculous? I mean, I can visualize being in the garage at that time. I can still visualize it, and being near the door, coming away from the car, being against on the right hand side of the big garage. Apart from the fact that the car had to be push-started, it performed well, and I very happily drove Barbara once more. We arrived it was at least 2 hours before the flight was due for departure, But such was Barbara's way, I mentioned that. During the wait, Barbara sat on a lounge in the more secluded corner of the airport. In coming into the airport, there was, as it were, a very wide passageway that led into a large lounge area. But as it were, the lounge area was round the corner from this wide entrance, and entrance. It was quite wide, and there were stalls there, counters there with regard to a car hire, such as that. And and on the wall at the end, against the wall, was this lounge, and then to the left, and then to the right was this large. Round the corner was this large lounge. He sat on a lounge in the more secluded corner of the airport, and we all stood around. Little was said, and there were long periods of general silence, with Barbara looking preoccupied and serious, and we, taking his mood, were likewise. There was virtually nothing said, just occasional. Gradually, during this time, we became aware that there was a growing, very large crowd nearby in the main thoroughfare of the terminal building. That is the lounge area that I spoke of. It's the large terminal area where people would naturally gather before being then leaving, across the tarmac to board the plane. As the crowd grew, so did laughter and chatter, and it seemed as though with the increase of noise